In the next few minutes, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to write an A+ compare-contrast thesis. Compare-contrast thesis only has two parts. You need two subjects to compare, and you need a certain amount of categories for which to compare them. Usually the number of categories is 3 because most essays in high school tend to follow the 5-paragraph format, but the number of categories can vary depending on the assignment you're working on. The challenge with writing compare-contrast really lies in the categories themselves. These are the 3 most common problems my students have, and you've probably run into them as well. The first one is what makes a category good? How do you actually choose categories? And finally, how do you actually make the thesis statement sound good? In this video, I'm going to tackle all 3 of those problems, give you solutions, and actually write a thesis statement for you to show you how it works. In this case, I'm going to choose my 2 topics. I'm going to compare the social media platforms Instagram and TikTok. First problem we need to solve is ultimately what makes a category good. And the challenge here is that students often choose categories that can't be argued. What I mean by that, if we take a look at these bad categories, you can't argue against them. That TikTok and Instagram both allow users to share content, that TikTok and Instagram both have millions of users worldwide, and that TikTok focuses on short form videos while Instagram allows users to share photos and videos. You can't argue that. That's not an interesting category. You can't say something about either side. You can't compare those. You need to find categories that are good. For example, in this first one, it talks about users' engagement, that TikTok's algorithm content discovery is more effective at keeping users engaged. You could also make a case that TikTok's short form video is better suited to decreasing attention spans. Or you could say that Instagram's integration with Facebook's advertising makes it a more valuable tool for businesses and influencers. These are good categories because you have something to say on both sides, not just one fact or the other. So find categories that are argumentative and you can argue for both sides. This leads us into the second problem with how do you actually choose categories themselves, as students often lack interesting and engaging categories. The reason is you need to find your categories during research, and you need to find more than you'll think you'll need. Many students, for example, find the first 3 categories they run across, and they find later in the writing process that they're praying to the writing gods because those 3 categories don't work well together. If you find more categories than you need, then when it comes to actually making the thesis and writing the essay, the odds that you have interesting categories and that the categories are going to come together well in the writing is a lot higher. For example, if we go back to the Instagram TikTok comparison, I have options for what I want to write about. I can talk about the social engagement, content discovery, influencer marketing, creative tools, privacy concerns, monetization. I have so many options of categories that I can choose the ones that fit best for my writing. And in the thesis I'm going to write, I think social engagement, content discovery, and creative tools, because they all focus on the user experience, work really, really well together. So what I have so far is I have my topics, Instagram and TikTok, and 3 categories. But we don't actually have a thesis statement. For that, we need to solve the third and most challenging problem, which is how do you actually make the thesis statement sound good? Students often lack an organizing structure in the thesis statement because the compare-contrast thesis is different than a traditional thesis. In a traditional thesis, you have one topic, one argument, and your 3 subtopics, which we could also call categories. Yet in compare-contrast, we have 2 topics, 2 arguments, where we have to say what's similar and different, and we have our 3 categories. If this was a traditional essay, the thesis is really simple. My topic, Instagram, I'm going to argue it's the most revolutionary social media platform for teens due to my 3 categories: social engagement, content discovery, and creative tools. But a compare-contrast thesis requires 2 solutions in order to make it sound good. The first solution we need to focus on is to actually add a sentence starter. So our format would be sentence starter plus our topics plus our 3 categories. I have some examples here of some similarities, sentence starters that seem to highlight the similarities between both of your topics. You can pause here if you want to look at these in more depth. And I have some examples that will highlight the differences between the 2. Again, you can pause here and take a look at these if you want. Now, what I have so far is I've chosen the sentence starter while both X and Y, my topics remain the same, as well as my 3 categories. Now that we have our sentence starter, let's jump into the second solution in order to make our compare-contrast thesis sound really good. What you're going to do is you're going to explain the similarities or the differences in your sentence starter and the topic together, which that leaves your 3 categories should explain the other, similarities or differences. If your sentence starter focused on similarities, your categories focus on differences. If your sentence starters and topic focused on differences, your 3 categories focused on similarities. Let me explain as I go through 2 thesis statements. So what I have with my sentence starter in this first one, I'm going to focus on the similarities between Instagram and TikTok. While both Instagram and TikTok, here's my similarity, remain two of the most popular social media platforms among teenagers. Now I'm going to focus on my three categories as the differences. Their social engagement, content discovery, and creative tools demonstrate underlying differences in the platform's experiences for their users. I can flip that around now and focus my sentence starter on differences and my categories on similarity. While both Instagram and TikTok differ in their algorithm-driven content discovery, their social engagement, content discovery, and creative tools demonstrate striking similarities that make them the two most popular social media platforms. The reason why I want you to focus on similarities or differences in the sentence starter and categories is because it gives you options. In this example here, my categories as they develop into the body paragraphs is mostly going to focus on the differences. Whereas in this one, in my body paragraphs, they're going to focus on the similarities. However, you may have a case where your teacher wants you to focus on both similarities and differences, and both of these thesis statements that I've given you can do that. It really just gives you options for what you can ultimately write about down the road. And there you have it. You now have an A+ thesis to structure your A+ essay. If you needed some help writing your compare-contrast thesis, you might also need some help with your writing, so click on this video here where I give you 6 tips for how to level up your writing. Take care, see you in the next one.